Yang Berusaha, Professor Dr. Yvonne Lim Ai Lian, Associate Deputy Vice Chancellor, Academic and International. Yang Berbahagia, Distinguished Professor Datuk Dr. Raja Rasya, Executive Director of the Asia-Europe Institute, Universiti Malaya. Yang Berusaha, Dr. Ahmad Badri Abdullah, Deputy Chief Executive Officer of the International Institute of Advanced Islamic Studies, IAIS Malaysia. Professor Dr. Kitaoka Shinichi, former President of the Japan International Cooperation Agency, JICA, and Emeritus Professor at the University of Tokyo and Rikyo University. Your Excellencies, Ambassadors and High Commissioners, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Selamat datang and a very warm welcome to another session of the Asia-Europe Institute's Eminent Person Lecture Series. Today's lecture is entitled Recent Developments in Japan's Security and Foreign Policy and will be presented by Professor Kitaoka Shinichi. To begin our event today, we would like to invite Yang Berusaha Associate Professor Dr. Roy Anthony Rogers, Deputy Executive Director, Development, Research and Innovation, Asia-Europe Institute, to deliver his welcoming remarks.
Yang Berbahagia Professor Yvonne Lim, Associate Deputy Vice Chancellor for Academic and International, the Honorable Professor Kitaoka Shinichi, our eminent speaker, and distinguished Professor Dr. Raja Rasya, Executive Director of Asia-Europe Institute, Universiti Malaya, who will moderate this session. Dr. Ahmad Badri Abdullah, Deputy CEO, International Institute for Advanced Islamic Studies, IAIS Malaysia. Dr. Adil Johan, Deputy Director for Academic and Student Affairs. Excellencies from the Foreign Missions and Diplomatic Community, Honorable Professors, Tan Sri, Datuk, ladies and gentlemen. Salam sejahtera and selamat datang. On behalf of the Asia-Europe Institute, Universiti Malaya, I would like to extend our warmest welcome to all, and especially to our Honorable Professor Kitaoka Shinichi. Maraya Daikaku Kwe Yokoso. Ladies and gentlemen, the Asia-Europe Institute have been hosting the Eminent Person Lecture Series, or EPELS. The last was Professor Sugata Bose, a professor of history at Harvard University. Besides, AEI also organized the Ambassador Lecture Series, where we had ambassadors from Spain, South Africa, and the Indian High Commissioner. We had the privilege to host a public lecture by the Deputy Foreign Minister of Russian Federation in line with the concept of Zone of Peace, Freedom and Neutrality, ZOFAN, advocated by Malaysia's foreign policy. Ladies and gentlemen, today we are indeed very honored to have Professor Kitaoka to address a crucial topic, that is recent development in Japan's foreign and security policy. Japan has practiced a policy of pacifism since the end of Second World War in 1945. It aligns with Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution, which outlaw war to settle international disputes involving Japan. However, Japan has an active foreign policy and has been playing an active role in international relations. For example, the Fukuda Doctrine of 1977 has been one of the cornerstones of Japan's engagement with Southeast Asian states. Malaysia adopted a locust policy in the 1980s and 1990s. Despite the rise of China, Japan remains Malaysia's close strategic partner. Therefore, today, we are indeed very privileged to have Professor Kitaoka Shinichi, who has have so much experience in diplomacy and foreign relations and foreign policy as a diplomat, as well in theory as an academic. So, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to express our sincere thanks and welcome to all, and especially to the Honorable Professor Kitaoka. Thank you. Terima kasih. Domo arigatou gozaimasu. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Roy. Next, we would like to invite Yang Berusaha Dr. Ahmad Badri Abdullah, Deputy Chief Executive Officer of the International Institute of Advanced Islamic Study, IAIS Malaysia, to deliver a few words.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and very good morning to all. I don't get the full salutation. Distinguished Professor Dr. Raja Rasya, the Executive Director of Asia Europe Institute, University of Malaya. The Honorable Professor Kitaoka Shinichi, Special Advisor to the President of JICA, Emeritus Professor, University of Tokyo, and Emeritus Professor Rikyo University, and other distinguished VIPs, Datuk, Datin, Tan Sri, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of IAIS Malaysia, its leadership and management, it gives me an immense pleasure to extend warm welcome to each and every one of you gathered here today. Allow me to briefly introduce IAIS Malaysia. The International Institute of Advanced Islamic Studies, IAIS Malaysia, serves as a think tank for the Malaysian government in matters concerning global Muslim affairs and international relations involving the Muslim community worldwide. Invoking soft power diplomacy, as highlighted by our Prime Minister during his meeting with our Chairman and CEO last week, IAIS has launched various agendas and programs aimed at improving both the Muslim community and the global society at large. In June, we successfully organized the Kazan Muslim Film Festival in collaboration with the Embassy of Russia in Malaysia and also the Selangor Public Library Corporation. And next week, ladies and gentlemen, we will host a one-day conference on Sudan, the Forgotten War, featuring the Ministers of Foreign Affairs of Malaysia and Sudan. I think we welcome everybody to join us in that conference next week on the 5th of August. So today we are honored to organize the Eminent Person Lecture Series with the Asia Europe Institute of the University of Malaya. This collaboration underscores our shared commitment to fostering dialogue and understanding on critical global issues. This joint lecture between AEI and IAIS is meant to consolidate the strategic and comprehensive relations between Malaysia and Japan. Our two countries shared a commitment to maintaining our Asian identity while also embracing the importance of constant and perpetual modernization. We strive for a form of development that meets the highest standards of sustainability. For today's topics of today's lecture, recent developments in Japan's security and foreign policy is both timely and significant in an era of rapid geopolitical changes. Understanding the strategic consideration of key nations like Japan is essential for building a more stable and peaceful world. We are privileged to have with us the Honorable Professor Kitaoka Shinichi, Special Advisor to the President of Japan International Cooperation Agency, JICA, to share his insight on this subject. His extensive experience and profound knowledge in the field of law, diplomacy, and international relations make him an ideal speaker to address this complex and involving topic. Arguably, Prof. Kitaoka's lecture seeks to solicit Malaysia's response to the idea of ASEAN Renaissance, as mentioned by our Prime Minister Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim, I think in his previous book, The ASEAN Renaissance. This vision is anchored in equitable and equal attention paid to China, Japan, and South Korea. At IAIS Malaysia, we believe that today's event plays a crucial role in bridging gaps between different cultures and political systems, promoting mutual respect and cooperation. By bridging together experts and scholars from diverse backgrounds, we aim to facilitate a deeper understanding of the multifaceted issues that shape our world. Ladies and gentlemen, your presence here today is a testament to the importance of continued dialogue and collaboration. And once again, I welcome every one of you to this public lecture, and I wish you all a fruitful and enlightening session this morning. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmad Badri Abdullah. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, may I now invite Yang Berbahagia Distinguished Professor Datuk Dr. Raja Rasya, along with Professor Kitaoka Shinichi, to please be on stage. I will now pass the mic to Prof. Raja to moderate the session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shike. I'm glad to see, despite the short invitation, must be the popularity of the world-renowned Professor Kitaoka Shinichi. We see a crowd, an appreciable crowd here. Thank you very much for coming. Let me start, apart from, again, mentioning Professor Kitaoka Shinichi, also Mr. Tanaka Hiru, Professor Suzuki Ayami, Madam Shimada Aya, and Madam Sugawara Minaku, and of course my deputy directors, Dr. Roy Anthony Rogers, Dr. Adil, and again our special speaker, Dr. Ahmad Badri from the International Institute of Advanced Islamic Studies, my honorable representative from the university, Assistant Vice Chancellor, Professor Iwan, who's here today. Thank you. And of course, other guests, His Excellencies, including Dr. Anis Yusal. A very warm welcome. Let me, I'm sure you've seen the abstract that I came up with, provided by Professor Kitaoka Shinichi. It's already, you will find he's got a very salutary, appreciable CV. I don't really have to mention very much. He was the former president of JICA, and again, currently the special advisor to the current president of JICA, who's here with us. Apart from many other things that he has done, you can, of course, in the interest of time, look through it. Let me try to locate his lecture briefly before I pass the cue to Professor Kitaoka Shinichi. I'd like to start not with the Tokugawa shogunate, because Japan had become poor then, largely an agricultural economy, until the Meiji Restoration. I don't want to say that much more until 1912, from 1868 when the previous regime was replaced. Let me mention that among the things left behind, it might be useful to connect with history, and I see that Professor Kitaoka is not only an expert on history, international relations, and law. It's interesting to have all those things combined. The Meiji Restoration left behind a highly centralized, efficient bureaucratic system of governance. The second, it also introduced a constitution with an elected parliament. Then we have, it actually brought about world-class transport and communication system at the time. Highly educated population, free from feudal restrictions, even though that was also the time when lots of Japanese relocated in America, not just the United States, but Latin America as a whole, which is why when I was doing fieldwork in UNICAM, the MP for Sao Paulo was Kobayashi, and of course the president of Peru was Fujimori, which you can understand from the past migratory patterns that were around. Japan had a powerful army and a navy. It's not just Japan sending all these small flights, bombing of Pearl Harbor, which I don't think Professor Kitaoka likes very much. He says those were the times when Japan made a mistake. I'm not sure what he meant. We will hear from him as he starts his lecture. But let me mention that you need to have carriers to take them there, and Japan had those carriers. And I'd also like to mention, I did history until Form 3, but the streaming system here is such that if you want to do history, you'll have to be in the back classes. So even though I was the district champion as the best student in history, and also the school performer, but I didn't do history, but I know that Japan beat Russia in the Russo-Japanese War, 1904-1905. I was thinking that the samurai swords were used then, because Form 3 history doesn't talk about how war was won. Until I read this book, I reviewed it for a journal, Technology Development in Pre-War Japan, the case of Mitsubishi Nagasaki Shipyard, where Yukiko Fukasaku, supervised by Christopher Freeman, uses oral history to say that Japan already had super tankers then, just how sophisticated the Japanese Navy was at that time, which I thought was incredible. And then, of course, the period when you had the Second World War, the First World War, Japan was on the side of the Allies, but not during the Second World War. And of course, the period of American occupation from 1945 to 1952. I'm not sure if you all remember Deming trying to reform things. The Zaibatsus too were reformed at that time. But I think Japan re-emerged. By the 80s, they were contesting the frontiers of technology, when you had firms like Hitachi, Fujitsu, Sony, and many other Japanese firms, not just Toray, which was into many different industries, from insurance to textiles and so on. But Japan was a major power technologically, which we don't seem to see so much at this moment, because you don't even have Hitachi. It is de-verticalized, leaving behind Renesas, which is not a big player. I think Toshiba is probably their leading firm now. Of course, you have the big automobile firms, a lot of them relocated in the US when there was pressure from the US about trade imbalances, Toyota, Honda, and Nissan. Now, let me also mention that the pressures that Japan faced included the Plaza Accord that led to the yen, apart from the won, new Taiwan dollar, the Hong Kong dollar then, as well as the Singapore dollar being floated, which also led to Malaysia having to pay higher debt service, because during Tun Mahathir, a big admirer of Japan, including his Lucas policy in 1981, Japan was the main model to imitate. I'm not sure how far we went, because we have not become a tiger, although some ministers are claiming that we will become a tiger, but let's just make that point. But also, while Japan is searching, I was very impressed with the abstract that Professor Kitaoka sent, which is not so much giving the impression of a lot of people think that Japan's foreign policy is in the hands of the US. But we will hear from him a very interesting abstract that he sent. I'm sure he's going to say a lot of things that would be somewhat different. But it's also true that despite all these things, Japan has the highest debt to GDP ratio, about 260%, Singapore 160%, Malaysia is slightly more than 60%, and they're worried. But of course, to me, the fiscal deficit is more important. Singapore doesn't have a fiscal deficit, rather than the debt to GDP ratio. Now, I think there are many things to talk about. I'm sure you came here to listen to Professor Kitaoka rather than me. Let me now mention that Professor Kitaoka will be delivering the Eminent lecture today, just after Professor Sugata Bose did the same earlier on Asia after Europe. That was the talk that he gave, which was also interesting. But I'm sure you're going to hear him speak about recent Japanese security and foreign policy, recent developments, and I'm sure you're going to learn a lot of new things, which I'm looking for. Professor Kitaoka, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much for very kind introductions, and very good morning to everyone. Thank you very much for coming to this lecture. I'm going to speak about recent developments in Japan's foreign and security policy. But in order to explain this, we have to understand what was the background of these recent changes. I'm going to speak on roughly 4 chapters: Japan's modernization, collapse of Japanese empire, and American occupation, the Yoshida doctrine, and number 4, post-Cold War period. Then, about Japan's modernization. As you know, in 1868, there was a declaration of restoration of imperial rule, which means that the government, which was run by Tokugawa family, by samurais, were changed into the system of the government to be governed by the emperor. This is a very important change because the government by the samurai continued for several centuries, which was changed into the system of the government directly ruled by the emperor. It took place in 1868, and then within 22 years, the Japanese first parliament was opened. That's a big change. And let me say a few words about the Edo period, which took place continued from 1603 to 1858. This system, Edo system, was created by this guy, Tokugawa Ieyasu, and then this is characterized as a centralized feudalism. Feudalism means that the country was divided into several areas. In the case of Japan, roughly 260 to 300 domains existed, taking care of the local politics. But the central politics was governed by Tokugawa shogunate. The power of the shogunate was very strong, which is a very major difference of this Tokugawa feudalism from other normal feudalism. Another very important policy, characteristic of this Edo period, the seclusion policy, the strict control of foreign relations, the going and coming, going out from Japan and coming into Japan was very strictly controlled. As a result, peace continued for 260 years. Is there any country or area which enjoyed peace for more than 2 centuries in the world? This is a very unique period in that length of the peace. Because of peace, there are many unique things took place, which I like to call peace dividend. First of all, population. Japan's population grew from 1600 to 1721, roughly more than twice. This is a very high growth in the pre-modern system in the world. And then based on the increase of rice production, the rice production was a major industry in Japan. And then along with this rise of the population, there was a development of commerce. So Japan became richer and with more population. More importantly, based on this one, there was a remarkable increase of literacy rate. Not only samurai, the ruling class, but also common people began to be able to read and write. This is a picture of small schools attached to temples and ordinary schools, ordinary buildings. There, not only the samurai were educated in special schools, but those common people, the children of farmers and merchants, were able to learn how to read and write. Without the skill of reading the letters and writing letters, you cannot make the business. So this is a picture of the children learning how to read and write and calculation. Now, another peace dividend was a flourishing, unique culture. This is the ukiyo-e, which had a very strong impact on the rise of the French Impressionists. I think still it is very important. If you have a chance to go to see those ukiyo-e in Tokyo or in other countries, I strongly suggest that you enjoy. This is a very famous, the big great wave. And then another unique culture which was born in Edo period was kabuki. If you have a chance to see kabuki, I strongly again recommend you go to see kabuki. And then kabuki is a Japanese style of opera, including singing, and dancing and the play. And then the unique characteristic of those ukiyo-e and the kabuki was that these are the arts supported by middle class. In world history, those kind of art are usually sponsored and supported by the king, emperor, or aristocrats, or big merchant. But these are supported by the common people in Edo and other major cities. But during this long peace period, there were also some negative legacies, which I'd like to call negative legacies. One is decline of navigation technology. Because going out from Japan was prohibited. They used to go to Southeast Asia before that, in which we call the warring state period from 14th century to 15th century. They could come to Malaya or Indonesia or Philippines. But it was prohibited. Therefore, the shipping navigation was confined so that they can engage in coastal navigation in Japan alone. Another negative legacy was decline of military technology. Because there was no fighting. It was not necessary to make a development of military technology. As the specialist points out, in the beginning of the Edo period, Japan was probably the biggest military power in the world in terms of the number of the guns owned by the Japanese people. But because of this decline of the military technology, when Western countries came to East Asia and then to Japan in 1853, the Japan's military technology was much inferior to the Western countries. That's why Japan had to open its country. And then the Tokugawa regime was collapsed because of this impact. Then Japan changed their mind to the nation building, switched to the building new nation. Among these are the characteristics, but I'd like to skip some of them. But I will later on explain some of them. First of all, they just try to introduce modern industry, and which was very costly. But this is a picture of Tomioka Silk Mill. It is registered as a World Heritage. And then this was established in 1872, which is a big and beautiful building, where they concentrated on the silk industry, which are the very important export good to. And this is a railway in Meiji Way. This is completed in the 5th year of Meiji, 1872, which is the first railway in Asia. Of course, it's in India by the British. And then also the Jakarta by the Dutch. Japan did it in 1872, which was a very early compared to other countries. And then this is a picture of a domestic exhibition for industrial promotion. The reason why I'm showing this one is that this was done in the period of Japan's Civil War. At this time, in 1877, there was an uprising from the southwest against the westernization of Japan. There was a terrible fighting took place in Japan. But still, the leader of the Japanese government by the name of Okubo Toshimichi, who insisted that we have to show the importance of, industry over military. That's why we have to continue this exhibition. It was done in Ueno Park. Today's Ueno area was just after this area. And also, of course, they put much emphasis on education. This is a relatively beautiful school, which is still remaining. And also, to the surprise of all the people, they decided to abolish the class system You know, Japan's traditional class system was a samurai on the top and then followed by farmers, merchants, and blah, blah, blah. They abolished it. Then, I just forgot, this was in 1876. I just forgot to say that the feudal domain or Han was abolished in 1871, 5 years before that. You know, the top leaders of Meiji government were recruited from those Han's domains, mainly from Yamaguchi Prefecture or Satsuma Prefecture, Kagoshima Prefecture, which were the driving forces of Meiji Restoration. The guys who succeeded in destroying the Tokugawa system became the leader of the new government. Their power was based on the Satsuma and Shoshu, but they decided to abolish the feudal domains, which are the source of their power. And later on, 5 years later, they destroyed class system, samurai system, in which they are included. Why? Because they believed that if Japan continued to be divided into several domains, and if Japan is divided into class systems, we cannot compete with the Western countries. We have to organize and integrate it, one country. Otherwise, we cannot continue we cannot compete with the Western countries. And then, as I said, in the year of 1877, this is a bit long. Some mistakes are included. As I said, the 1877 is the year of the end of the Civil War in Japan. Okay, and then at that time, the leader Okubo Shimichi, I forgot to attach a picture of Okubo Shimichi here, but actually he had to pay his price. He was assassinated by the reactionary people. And then the rebel from the south was suppressed, and in 1877. But it was a starting point of the new movement, which was a freedom of people's rights movement. You know, it was understood that the rise from Satsuma, which was the strongest feudal military, was destroyed by the central government. The people understood that, oh, new government is strong. We cannot cope with them by military power. But they started to criticize the government by writings and speeches. This was the starting of freedom and people's rights movement from 1877. 4 is a mistake, sorry. And then by so doing, you know, people who are not samurais, who are originally farmers, could participate in this movement, because this movement do not need any sword or weapons. And also, the area which was destroyed, which was defeated in the war in Meiji Restoration, could also participate, because this is a competition and then criticism from the people by writings. And then, so they insisted that Japan has to have a constitution. But interestingly, the people in the government also agreed that we have to have a constitution. As a result, the Meiji Constitution was created in 1889. Then, you know, traditional interpretation of Meiji Constitution is, which I criticize, is saying that this is modeled after German Constitution, which I defy. Compared to the German Constitution, this Meiji Constitution gave a relatively strong power to the lower house, to the people. And then the lower house had a veto against the budget. Therefore, based on this veto, the political party developed from this one. And then this is the start of parliamentary politics. And then from the start of party politics, only within 10 years, the political parties could organize a political party, a cabinet. You know, if German Constitution was a model of Meiji Constitution, how come Japan can make a cabinet based on political parties? this shows the big difference between the German constitution and Japanese constitution. Meiji constitution gave much more power to the people. Why? Again, why? In order to compete with the Western countries, we have to organize the people's power. Otherwise, we cannot compete with the Western countries. That's why the government leaders established this constitution to invite people's participation. Still, discrimination from the West continued a lot. In order to be recognized as a major power, Japan has to show its own power to the Western country. That's partly why the war with China took place in 1894, which surprised the West country. Because, China was believed to be a sleeping lion, but actually Japan won this war relatively shortly. Then again, it was still Japan had to show its power by fighting against Russia. Russian objective was to have a control over the southern coast of Korea. They were willing to come to this area. But if the southern part of Korea was the Korean Peninsula was controlled by Russia, then Japan's activity would be very much confined. Therefore, Japan wanted to get rid of Russian influence from Korean Peninsula. That's why this war started. And then, supported by the British, the Russian fleets had to go from, they cannot use the Suez Canal, so they had to go from this area, from Madagascar to Vietnam, and came to the Sea of Japan, and was destroyed by the Japanese fleet, which was waiting for their coming. So I can say that, Japan had two, points. One is that Japan did not have Japan was under the extraterritoriality. If foreign people, suppose if a British gentleman commits a crime in Japan, he cannot be judged by the Japanese. He is to be judged by the British consul. If a French gentleman commits a crime, he is going to be judged by the French consul. Japan does not have its legal system control over the foreigners. This was, lifted after Japan's victory over China. But still, Japan did not have a custom autonomy. Japan's custom duty to import goods was, had to be very low, so that Western countries can export their goods to Japan. But we have no influence over their custom duty in Britain or France. So this was very unequal. But this kind of, inequality was changed after this Russo-Japanese war, after Japan's victory over Russia. So it was, they were a little bit, in a sense, they are right. In order to get equal status, we have to show our power. That's why Japan went into the war, 2 wars. And then again, the third war Japan fought, Japan joined, was Japan's entry into the World War I. And then after the victory in the World War I, Japan became to be regarded as one of the 5 major powers in the world, but number 5, and the inferior partner of the major powers. The evidence. When the League of Nations was established after the World War I, Japan wanted to establish principle of racial equality. The Japan's proposal for Russian racial equality principle was rejected by the then President of the United States, Woodrow Wilson. So Japan had to suffer from this kind of discrimination against by the major powers. Well, so it's up until World War I, Japan was doing relatively well. In the Meiji period, marvelously well, but after that, some stagnation. But still, Japan's collapse started after World War I. The trigger was, the Great Depression in 1929. Japan was still a, poor country at that time. Japan was willing to export a lot of goods the major customer was the United States. But when the Great Depression took place, in order to protect the domestic industry, the United States raised their custom rate very high, which was a big shock to Japan. So Japan's export to the United States dropped less than half. And then Japan went into a terrible economic situation. And then at that time, military, and one of the worst characteristics of Meiji Constitution was that the military was allowed to enjoy the independence from the civilian control. And then they started an invasion into Manchuria. And then it was militarily, in short term, it was relatively successful. Well, they went into the Manchuria and established Manchukuo, which I criticize very much. This was a start of a series of wrong decisions. But in the short term, it was successful. But in order to protect this one, they went on to expand their influence over North China. And then into, this was the area which Japan controlled in the late 1930s. Then the United States and the other country finally started strong economic sanction against Japan, and then Japan started the war against the United States. This is a terrible mistake, of course. As a result, Japan was destroyed in 1945. There was a very heavy bombing in 1945. For example, in Tokyo, March 10th in 1945, 100,000 people died in one day by American bombing, followed by Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So these are terrible damages done. And then as a result, Japan surrendered in August 15, 1945. And then this was the start of post-war Japan. What's important was that this is the rough, points of this period. We have to remember that the initial policy of the United States to Japan was to make Japan a harmless country. Demilitarization and democratization, because they believed that democratic countries are peace-loving. Not necessary, but anyhow, they decided that to demilitarize. Because of this reason, for example, martial arts are prohibited. Judo, kendo, karate are prohibited. Kabuki was also prohibited because this was art to support the feudal mentality. It's a mistake, but anyhow, many things are done. Then also the study of airplane and space was prohibited in Tokyo University. So the major objective was to make Japan a harmless country. And then the writing of constitution by the United States. Japan's today's constitution was written by the American people, and then the forced to Japan in 1946, in which they had a key clause, on which I will explain later, the Article 9, to prohibit Japan's military. And also, they had a military tribunal in 1946 to 48. Many people were killed by them. But within a few years, the Cold War began to deepen in Asia also. In Europe, it started to deepen in 1946 or so. In Asia, 47 and 48, it became very clear that the confrontation between the United States, US camp, and the Soviet Russian camp became very sharp. And then the United States changed their policy from punishing Japan to supporting Japan. So this is the constitution, as you see, aspiring sincerely to an international peace based on justice and order. The Japanese people forever renounce war as a sovereign right of the nation and the threat of or use of force as means of settling international disputes. I have no objection to this part. And then So this is, many people say that Article 9, that prohibited war. Well, the war is prohibited at the UN Charter and other constitutions. So this is okay. But the latter half is very unique or strange. In order to accomplish the aim of the preceding paragraph, land, sea, and air forces as well as other war potential will never be maintained. The right of belligerency of the state will not be recognized. You know, Japan is not an independent country at that time, under occupation. But, you know, there's no independent country which does not have any military forces. Any country is allowed to have some military forces to defend itself. This is a universal, except for one or two exceptions in the world. But as a whole, this is a universal rule for any country to have a right to have some military forces to defend itself. Then, so the American policy changed from demilitarization to supporting Japan. During this period, the leader of Japan was Yoshida Shigeru, here, Prime Minister. He just concluded the Treaty of Peace, San Francisco, and then also U.S.-Japan Security Treaty. This security treaty, we call this the old treaty. This was a very unequal. The essence was Japan proposes the basis to the United States. The United States accepts this offer so that they can make use of these bases. There's no obligation for the United States to defend Japan. This is a very unilateral, unequal treaty. But anyhow, Yoshida took advantage of American policy. They just wanted to concentrate on economic recovery without doing much effort in building military or so. So this is called as Yoshida Doctrine, concentration on economic activities without paying much attention to the security area. This policy was challenged a couple of times by some leaders, such as Kishi Nobusuke, who became the prime minister from 1957 to 1960. You know, I just wanted to draw your attention to the three principles of Japan's diplomacy. Okay, what is three principles? In addition to the close ties with the United States, he just insisted on the importance of the United Nations and also importance of the diplomacy as the Asian countries. So UN and Asia were stressed as important by Kishi. But he did not neglect the importance of the U.S.-Japan security. Rather, he just revised the U.S.-Japan security treaty to a little more equal, but not totally equal, to a little more equal direction. But he had to face with a massive demonstration from the people because of a couple of reasons, which I omit. He was surrounded by the massive demonstration. This is a demonstration surrounding the parliament, which we have never seen for, say, 60 years or so. And as a result, Kishi had to resign. Therefore, in a sense, very briefly stated, the effort by Kishi to revise Yoshida Doctrine failed because he had to resign from this one. And then the Japanese policy went back to Yoshida Doctrine in the sense of concentrating in economic activities rather than not paying much attention to the security area. Japan expanded, and then Japan developed because of this Yoshida Doctrine. During that time, Japan's expansion, economic activities in Southeast Asia was very accelerated. And then there were some, conflicts took place. But after that, Fukuda Takeo was the prime minister. He came to East Asia, Southeast Asia, and he just showed the so-called Fukuda Doctrine. And this became the basis of Japan's foreign policy toward Southeast Asia, in which we have to have an equal footing. We have to have a very good relations. Heart-to-heart understanding is necessary. We are equal partner. Remember, at that time, Japan's economy was much, much bigger than ASEAN as a whole. But Japan decided to go as an equal partner to ASEAN. Japan was successful thanks to the Yoshida Doctrine, but it continued too long. And then in the 1980s, the Cold War began to decline. And then with the rise of Gorbachev, and then Russian Soviet policy began to change. And then some American leaders and people began to think that the biggest threat to the United States is not Russia, but Japan. And then there began a lot of conflicts between Japan and the United States. Gorbachev. And then this is the Plaza Accord in 1985. By the pressure from the United States, before 1985, at that time, $1 was 250 yen. Okay? The Japan accepted their demand to make the $1 120, twice in 2 years. There's no such a drastic change of currency in world history, I think. You know, this resulted in the inflation in Japan. And then in the long run, the Japan stagnation until recently is a result of this drastic economic change. There were very tough criticism against Japan. This is the picture of American guys destroying Japanese cars. It was called as trade war. And then there are many pictures like this, American Congress people destroying Japan's radio cassette or American automobiles. Think, can Japan do the same in Japan? Destroying American goods in front of American embassy. It is not done. So Japan had to face a very difficult situation with the United States. So Japan made concessions after concession to the United States, which is the starting point of Japan's stagnation continued for 3 decades. On the other hand, Japan's security environment is becoming worse. You know, long issue of Kuril Island, North Island issue. And then from 1990s, North Korea began to develop missiles and nuclear weapons. And then Chinese expansion to the Senkaku area. You know, China had never made any territorial claim over Senkaku issue until 1970s. But they began to make a claim, and then in 1992, they enacted a territorial sea law, which include Senkaku Island. So they expanded gradually, and followed by the expansion in South China Sea in the south. This became very clear in the 2010s. So faced with these challenges in the security area, Japan was unable to maintain its low-profile security policy. Japan had to change some security policies. They began to change gradually, slowly in 1992. Japan was unable to participate in international activities in 1990 when Gulf War took place. This was a picture of ANTAC. Japan participated in UN peacekeeping operations in Cambodia in 1992. This was, strictly speaking, the first dispatch of self-defense forces overseas. Because, you know, under Yoshida Doctrine, the government used to say that Japan will never dispatch any military forces overseas. But they decided to change. These are the list of the Japan's, unnecessary and unnatural restrictions over security policy. The top is, as I spoke, no dispatch of self-defense forces abroad. Finally, 1992, gradually and slowly, we started to participate in peacekeeping operation. The second, exclusively defense-oriented policy was proposed by the Japanese government. We will engage in defense only. But do you think it's possible to engage in defense only? Is there any football in defense only? Is there any baseball in defense only? Any war has to have a defense dimension at the same time offense dimension. Clausewitz pointed out there's no purely defensive war at all. Even if we are on the defensive, if we are the enemy comes into our territory and we have to get it back, then this involves in offensive activities. But this theory is based on a strange theory that Japan will engage in defensive role only, while the United States will engage in an offensive role. Well, we are different countries. Is it sure? Can we believe that the United States will engage in offensive activities as we wanted? No, this is a theory, artificial theory. Number three, three principles of the export of weapons. This is a de facto prohibition. We will not export any weapons to the world. Okay, but still, because of this, rule or this doctrine, Japan's military industry declined sharply because, they cannot export weapons to the world. Of course, selling weapons is not a very good kind of thing. But suppose there are good countries which are threatened by other neighboring countries. Why don't we support them? For Ukraine, for example, we are supporting them. Japan is supporting by money only, and also with some equipment. The maximum is the helmets. We are exporting helmets, and also we are bringing some demining machines. This is a defensive role. That's okay, but still, we are not able to export any weapons. Because of that, the Japan's military industry has become smaller and smaller. And the military-related study was prohibited in major universities. Also in Tokyo University, it was prohibited. This is very strange. Because, how much is outspin of military study? Internet has come from the military study. And also how much NASA has provided a lot of things to civilian area. Again, defense budget must be below 1% of GDP. These are the very strange, and unnecessary restrictions imposed by Japanese government by themselves. It was began to be changed by Prime Minister recently, Prime Minister Abe, who came into power in 2006 and 2007, and secondly from 2012 to 2020. What he proposed that free and open Indo-Pacific. In order to enjoy free trade, we have to stabilize the area. And Japan's needs a free and open Indo-Pacific, which benefits all the countries. Southeast Asian country needs the area in which you can enjoy free trade. And Japan's influence over Southeast Asia and Japan's also support to South Asia could come to connect those two Asian areas. Based on this fact, Prime Minister Abe proposed that we are going to support the free and open Indo-Pacific. And then this concept was supported by President President Obama, Trump, and Biden. There are very few policies which are supported by those competing presidents. This is one of the very few. And then Quad was also proposed and supported. Cooperation, security cooperation between India, Japan, Australia, and then United States. This was also supported. Also, when the United States withdrew from the this agreement, Japan still remained in this CPTPP, and then the many members are joining into this CPTPP. This is becoming an important pillar of free trade in the world. So, in a sense, the Japan's influence is expanding, while Japan's economic power is in stagnation. The idea based on the historical facts of Japan's recovery is very important. From this on, this is a kind of propaganda of my theory. My proposal is that Japan, Korea, ASEAN countries, Australia, New Zealand, Pacific Island countries, and to the west, Bangladesh, why don't we think about organizing a union among those countries? There is a EU in Europe. Then why not in Western Pacific or Pacific area among those countries? We have many things in common. No country likes to be a tributary country to China or United States. And then most countries in this region need US security support to some extent. But on the other hand, no countries would like to see sharp decline of trade with China. We still need some trade with China. And then number 4, definitely, no country likes to clash with China. United States can make a clash with China. We cannot make it. Therefore, we have to organize this kind of grouping. And then, as an ambassador to the nation, I noticed a lot of influence from EU. EU can make a decision-making on important issues to create a common position among themselves. And then to say to the international community, it is influential. Because this is made of a group of, at that time, 25 countries. Today, unless you are a superpower with a, huge population, or huge territory, or nuclear weapons, your voice is not heard very much. In order for us to be heard, we have to create a union among ourselves. That's why European countries created EU, and why not create a Western Pacific Union or Pacific Union in this area, from Japan, Korea to the ASEAN countries. Actually, when you examine the ASEAN Charter, there's no clause which is very difficult for Japan to accept. We are basically on the same line. There is a commitment to democracy or democratic value in ASEAN Charter, though there is some undemocratic country. That's okay. There have been a lot of ideas proposed in this area to how to organize a regional organization in Asia. One big difficulty is to include China. China is too big to include. Therefore, my idea is, let's create a union without superpowers, by the countries which understand the importance of international cooperation. United States, as is shown by the word of Make America Great Again, or America First, they can go on without cooperating with other countries. Russia can do the same, or China can do the same, or possibly India can do that. But still, Japan is still a large country, and also to your middle-sized country, and also including the small countries. We cannot go on without cooperation with other countries. Among those countries which believe in the importance of international cooperation, let's create an organization like this. This is my idea, which was proposed 3-4 years ago. And then a lady sitting on the front line, Ms. Suzuki, was one of the co-author in this. Well, in that sense, Japan's appeal in foreign policy has been so small until recently. Considering Japan's big economic size, Japan was a relatively regional power or the only partner with the United States. But Japan's influence is, can be recognized even in Africa or in Europe, as is shown by the willingness of the European countries to be part of the CPTPP. Also, Japan's, security capability is important. We can develop it more to support the like-minded, peace-loving countries. Therefore, I'd like to call the changes which started to by Prime Minister Abe as modest steps toward normal countries, or modest steps toward normal peace-loving countries. South Korea is providing a lot of bullets and guns to Ukraine. We are providing only helmets and demining machines. That's good, but still I believe we can do more. And also we can show more independent approach to, say, the area to Palestine, of course. As a former president of JICA, I can introduce you one project. In Jericho, in Western Bank, we have a project named JIP, Jericho Agro-Industrial Park, which is a project supported by Israel and Palestine together. Also supported by Japan, JICA, and Jordan. This is a kind of, model of two-state solution. This is, in reality, we are supporting two-state solution. But the situation which is taking place in that area is just betrayal against the two-state solution. The United States is a very important partner to us, so it's not easy for Japan to go away from the United States clearly. But while keeping the good relations with the United States, we have to persuade the United States to change their course slightly. Actually, Prime Minister Abe had persuaded Mr. Trump a couple of times on important issues. Therefore, this is very important. Also, Japan's strong point is that Japan was, in the past, historically, Japan was developing countries. Japan had to face a lot of discrimination against by the Western countries. Therefore, we understand how developing countries are feeling against the developed countries. This means that we are able to bridge the gap between the developing countries and advanced countries. Or I'd like to call it, Japan's responsibility in world history to make a gap, to fulfill the gap between the Western countries and then developing countries. Whether we can do that, I do not know. I'm not very sure. But there's a possibility of making it. Some people say that too slow, too little, but still, it's better than nothing. So that's why I'm proposing that, first of all, we have to strengthen our approach to Southeast Asia first, and then globally we make we have to take up a more, independent policy so that we can make a gap, we can fulfill the gap between the developed countries and the developed countries. Remember what Prime Minister Kishi said in 1957. He said that not only the United States, he was planning to strengthen U.S.-Japan relations, but at the same time, he just wanted to propose the people that the importance of United Nations and Asian countries. So this is a high time to say goodbye to Yoshida Doctrine and then to modify the policy of the Kishi and then to be a global country together with the countries which like the international cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Kitaoka Shinichi. I'm sure you all will agree with me that we've had a wonderful, brilliant lecture. I, at least, found the profound history that he presented refreshing and something that simply added a lot more to what I knew before. Among the points that I thought key for me to see as a takeaway will be the one on the Security and Peace Treaty of 1951 that imposed heavy restrictions that meant that Japan could not build its military back again to ensure that Japan could defend itself. And of course, there were implications for that, which were also presented in the context of all these trade pressures that the Japanese faced from the 80s in particular. Although I must say that my history shows that from 1971, there was no restrictions on foreign ownership, though foreign equity in Japanese investments with Japan remain low. Japan and Italy are somewhat similar in relation to the extent of equity from foreign investments. I'd like to also mention that the second thing is a departure that I like very much, that regional cooperation and so on that Professor Kitaoka raised about is to get away from superpower dominance. This is in contrast to what some of us, at least for a long time, had this view that Japan didn't have a foreign policy and it was only doing what the US was dictating, not just Japan, but also Britain and the Netherlands, among other countries. And I'm not sure I would take the same position on all three countries, but it brings back at least something Sukarno started with the Bandung Conference in 1955, the non-aligned movement. But it wasn't made official until President Tito in 1961 in Belgrade, in my address, and formalized that concept, which very much, I think, is what our zone of peace, freedom, and neutrality, ZOCFAN, that Tun Razak made as a component of ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, focusing on taking a middle position, middle power, that hybrid version of a normalized middle power, taking account of protecting, shielding, staying, representing the disadvantaged nations, which is what largely what Professor Kitaoka Shinichi presented to us. I like that very much. Now, in the interest of time, let me open the floor for discussion. Yes, there's one immediate hand rise. Or you can take. No, you better, because the hall is quite big. Mafuda, can you hurry a bit? Yeah. Not open yet. All right. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Professor. Thank you for your informative speech. I'm a Chinese student at the University of Malaya. I have been looking forward to the free trade negotiation between China, Japan, and Korea. I believe this free trade rule will benefit the people from the three countries. But, when there is a progress on the negotiation, and the USA will jump out to impair the negotiation atmosphere. So I have two questions. The first one is, how do you think of the future of the free trade rule between the three countries? And the second one is how to make a progress on the independence of foreign policy of Japan. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Yes. Professor Fumitaka Furuoka. Can someone rush the mic quickly to me?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Professor Kitaoka. Very interesting historical background. Here is the Asia Europe Institute, and we should little bit study about economic integration from the European experience. Schuman Declaration is starting from the economic sort of spillover. That's why, therefore, I think economic integration and the political integration should be hands in hand. In that case, very interesting point to know about Western Pacific. But in terms of economy, especially supply chain, we have to be China be the inside. Otherwise, always European case also, political economy is hands in hand. We cannot be only voice, but we need to have more economic reality. If it is so, our supply chain, the ASEAN country, even Japan, Korea, so much. I think just now the gentleman point of view.
Question, sir.
Sorry. That's why if you professor is talking about Western Pacific Union, how consider about economic side of integration is?
Okay, thank you very much for interesting and important questions. First of all, I'm very much concerned about the U.S. trade policy because, that's clearly they are violating the GATT, principle of GATT or the policy of using the custom, to protect their domestic industry. And actually, Mr. Trump's policy is wrong. Even to protect the domestic industry. We have benefited so much from the free trade. Free trade, by which I mean that not only free, but also the expectability. How we can calculate. Unless we can expect the ordinary transactions, we cannot engage in the policy, the trade. Therefore, on that policy, the American policy of imposing a high custom rate is something I'm very much concerned about. Europe has also one policy. Therefore, for Japan should not follow the U.S. policy alone, but we have to also cooperate with European countries and then to create one standard. But also, I have a concern, frankly speaking, China has a tendency of weaponization of trade. If there is something in your neighboring countries which is China does not like, then you can make you can create some trouble with them. When the Philippines engaged in some minor diplomatic activities, which is not something you like, then you can slow down the process of importing process of banana, for example, so that banana cannot be used domestic. So if you say, please be sure to get attached to the principle of indifferent kind of activities. Trade has to be free. Trade has to be equal. By which I mean that even if there are some minor troubles, we should engage in trade. That's my point. My second point is, comparison with the European case. We do not have to follow their case always. For example, they are, roughly speaking, Christian countries. Their political systems are different each other. I'm not saying that we have to become all democracies. In this region, there are monarchies and Islamic countries, Buddhist countries, and then diversity is our forte. That's okay. They are basically Christian countries. But certainly, they started with this from your reference to human rights is very welcome. But at the same time, one thing is missing. My point is that I have been a partner, I have been a member of a bilateral dialogue, second track or 1.2 track, between Japan, US, Japan, China, Japan, Korea, Japan, Germany, Japan, US, Japan, France. Many cases. But there is very few dialogue between Japan and the Southeast Asian countries. I have been a member of a dialogue forum between Japan and Singapore only once. Therefore, what's important is in the long run, I think, I would like to create a kind of community of public intellectuals in this Western Pacific area, so that the Japan's public intellectuals who know very well about the government policy, but still a different idea on foreign policy. I'm very much willing to find a counterpart in the South, and then get together very quickly, very often, because there's no time difference. It's easy to fly from Japan to this country. Therefore, my primary objective is to accelerate the effective and frank dialogue between the young Korea to the Southeast Asian area. Thank you.
The floor to more questions. Let me give my take from the question raised by Professor Fumitaka just now. I think it was quite clear, the spirit that I captured from the earlier lecture that Professor Kitaoka Shinichi gave, that the opening up, of course, no one's talking about free trade in the perfect sense. Perfect competition doesn't exist. But it's just like most industrial upheaval, most rapid economic growth based on industrial takeoff had restrictions. All examples, including what Alexander Hamilton did, advising President Jefferson in 1791, how the U.S. Caught up industrially against, say, Britain. Now, the point I'd like to make is one interesting thing that came out, which I thought was different hearing from a Japanese professor, is the recognition of an egalitarian system, that you should not have superpowers there. I remember speaking to Ambassador Kyung from Korea. In fact, he's very much into it. The next Indo-Pacific exercise, because it's seen today as led by the US with a narrow NATO sort of perspective. He says they have even invited China. They'd like to see everybody is participating, and that's what Professor Kitaoka just answered just now, that there should be frank negotiations. Should we have had, I think very much we should have had increased negotiations in relation to the Russia-Ukraine war, which broke out in February 2022. So I think that's the way to go if you want to build in the spirit of what Sukarno began with, a non-aligned movement, that we want to see a fair and equal world. Questions from, yes, sir. Datuk Baskaren. We have about 7 minutes, I think.
So, Professor Kitaoka, do you see the Quad, which is now not a military alliance or a defense alliance, which is reiterated again last week at the Quad meeting in Japan, but do you think it might progress towards defensive military alliance along the lines of NATO? That's the first question. Second question is, will Japan rearm? And is that going to be taking a long process with companies like Mitsubishi and so on? Just 2 questions, sir.
Thank you. Oh, yes. Dr. Roy Anthony Rogers.
Thank you very much, Prof. Kitaoka. My question is, how would you describe Malaysia-Japan relations, the contemporary Malaysia-Japan relations? In fact, we have, as I mentioned earlier on, the Lukis policy. In fact, Sultan Abu Bakar, the great-great-grandfather of the current Agong, visited Emperor Meiji. You mentioned about Meiji. This was in 1883. So we have a long friendship, not just Lukis policy, but even as early as 1883. But how about Malaysia-Japan contemporary relations, especially with the rise of China? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. The role of Quad is very difficult because India is a very independent country. So, but still, there's a very difficult and important relationship between India and China. So the stability, the presence of India does have some positive influence for us. Therefore, we don't want India to attack China. That's no progress. And, it's impossible to think about any attack from the neighboring country to China. It's impossible. It's a suicide. Therefore, Japan's traditional policy was, vis-a-vis North Korea, for example, while they are developing, Japan was trying to develop the missile defense only. I thought that it's impossible to make effective missile defense only. So my position is that let's develop a counter-strike capability. We will not start a war, never. But still, if they shoot us, we will make a counterattack to you. So this is roughly, this can be applied to other area. We need China as a big market. And also, China is a big country. So we cannot win over China. But still, if China makes a strange kind of thing, we cannot be patient. We cannot be quiet forever. And second, the relationship between Japan and Malaysia. As I was remembering that, why strong and clever leaders are born in this area. Those back to many years ago. So Mr. Scarno, then Mahathir and Lee Kuan Yew, and then including Lee Teng-hui. They know major restoration very, very well. Even Mr. Nehru of India, he encountered Japan's victory over Russia at the age of 17. And he began to realize that, we can make it. We can make our country independent. So that they certainly had some impact from Japan's rise in that period. Unfortunately, Japan made mistakes and went to a wrong way. But still, Japan's success in modernization and major restoration had a very big impact. Therefore, while learning about the activities of leaderships in the excellent leaders in this region, I sometimes feel that they are repeating our success in major restoration. One more thing is that, Japan has a relatively long history of Islamic studies. As I was chatting with you, I was educated at a school run by Todaiji Temple, which is the biggest temple in Japan. And then there's a high-ranking priest. So he's substantially one of the top priests in Japan who has a PhD in Islamic studies. This is a very unique phenomenon. I don't know any other religious leader who has a PhD in other religion. Probably this is only one. So this is, on the basis, we have a feeling that the people are equal. Okay? We have to be kind to you. And then we have to be honest. And then there are some similarities in Islamic religion. Therefore, one of the link between Japan and Malaysia might be this one. Then I have to repeat one more thing. When Japan started the cooperation with the countries in this region from 1950s and mainly 60s, 70s, JICA was very much criticized by the Western countries. Why do you support relatively better countries than Africa? You should support more to African countries. We said, no. In this area, also, they criticized that. Why do you support dictators in this region? Our response was, no, they are not a terrible dictatorship. They are moderate authoritarian. And when they stabilize their country and they start their development, then they may become a rich country and then they can become a donor in the long run. We are wrong. Which was wrong? We are right. So the prosperity of this area was done mainly by the people and the leaders of those countries, of course. But still, I believe that Japan did some contribution to this process. We are very much proud of that. Globally, I have traveled all over the world. I have traveled up until now 119 countries. Then this area is a successful area. And then Japan made some contribution. So our relations can be a model to other area. Therefore, we have to be confident about our success, and we have to expand our success. One thing I just wanted to add is that, while I'm saying that we have to make a bridge between the advanced country and the developing countries, they bring sometimes universal values directly, which is not very good, I think. I visited Pakistan, for example. In Pakistan, there's a big gap between the gender. They believe that women are weak. They have to be protected. Therefore, they should not go afar. Therefore, they cannot go to school. They criticize it. Western people criticize it. We don't. We quietly build small schools near their village, which is better. In other words, our approach is, indirect, taking time approach. This is better. And then I think that so-called universal value should be also modified on the part of the developing country. This is another area where Japan has to contribute. Thank you.
Professor Kitaoka Shinichi. We have to recognize that despite all these eminent positions that Professor Kitaoka holds as former president of JICA, currently the special advisor of JICA, and of course, an institution builder who's been instrumental in building several universities. He's a scholar. I'm sure if you allow him to speak, the more you shake the tree of Kitaoka Shinichi, that much more knowledge that you'll get. But of course, we have a constraint on time. So we have to end this session because he's got other appointments to meet. Apart from mentioning a few things, although he mentioned so many things, among the things he mentioned concerns, he talked about the Senkaku Islands, what China has been doing. But I remember listening to General Almonte, the Philippines general then. He made a point that Pahlawan is only 24 kilometers from the Spratlys Islands, while the nearest part of China, Hainan, is more than 1,000 kilometers away. But China has taken control of the Spratlys Islands, also the Paracel Islands. So there are lots of concerns in East China Sea as well as South China Sea. So I think I'm of course, in making that point, not calling for a war, certainly not as the position taken by Professor Kitaoka-san. All these require peaceful negotiations. That sort of point I mentioned. The second one is I used to work funded by JICA in the 90s. In fact, now that I've listened to and highly impressed with our eminent speaker today, I think AEI would very much like to cooperate and build relationships with JICA. The last time I did was as APEC Study Center Director for Asia. For Malaysia, I was there in Vietnam, Laos PDR, Cambodia, and Myanmar in 1994, including meeting the junta generals in Yangon. Largely when the greater Mekong area were keen on integrating with AFTA, the ASEAN Free Trade Area. I was very much the guy who led the team to train them to get in. So I think these are important points, but let me then, given the fact that we haven't got any time, in the usual Malaysian way, I certainly have learned a lot from Professor Kitaoka-san. I'm sure you all will agree with me. Let's give him a big hand.